Hello, and welcome to my in-depth guide to the Arbiter of the Lost Abyss boss encounter in Honkai Star Rail that debuted in version 4.3 as the Apocalyptic Shadow version of the Judge of Oblivion boss. I'll be going over attacks, mechanics, some general tips, and characters that may be noteworthy for the fight. I'll also attempt to explain its general attack patterns and behaviors based on my observations, but these can be much more tedious and difficult to determine, and some of this information may not even be useful. A summary for the fight itself is included, and I'll leave timestamps in the description. As of the time of uploading, this boss is in the Apocalyptic Shadow 4.3 rotation, and while ideally a guide would be applicable across all iterations, when it comes to character selection, it's very difficult to decouple that from the changing Universal Ruinous Embers effect and selectable finalities axiom buffs. Future iterations of the boss may also have different numbers, but are unlikely to change mechanically. If you are watching this for a rotation after 4.3, check the comments to see if I've made any additional comments or clarifications. To start with an overview of the attributes, the main boss body, bearing its namesake Arbiter of the Lost Abyss, has two phases. It has a weakness to physical, fire, lightning, and imaginary damage, a 20% resistance to ice, wind, and quantum damage, which is less than the Apocalyptic Shadow boss standard of 40%, and 8 toughness bars of 120 each. As part of the main gimmick of the fight, Arbiter of the Lost Abyss summons 3 different enemies: Ichor Memosprite Winged Serpent, Ichor Memosprite Canine, and Ichor Memosprite Pheasant. Note that some attributes differ from general or Memory of Chaos encounters. Winged Serpents have a weakness to physical, fire, and ice damage, a standard 20% resistance to lightning, wind, quantum, and imaginary damage, and 200 toughness. Canines have a weakness to ice and imaginary damage, a standard 20% resistance to physical, fire, lightning, wind, and quantum damage, and 100 toughness. Pheasants have a weakness to physical and fire damage, and a standard 20% resistance to ice, lightning, wind, quantum, and imaginary damage. They can be summoned under 2 different scenarios in the fight, and they will either have 80 or 60 toughness depending on which. More on this later. With the attribute overview out of the way, let's move on to what I consider to be the main gimmick of the fight. At the start of each phase, Arbiter of the Lost Abyss temporarily removes itself from combat and summons 1 Winged Serpent, 2 Canines, and 2 Pheasants in its place, all of which gain the Monoform Merger effect. The Pheasants summoned here have 80 toughness each. The boss also gains 48 stacks of Bloodline Frailty. Since the main boss does not take any turns during this period, status effects do not tick down normally. When any of the Ichor Memosprites here with Monoform Merger take action, 1 stack of Bloodline Frailty is removed from the boss. When any given one takes fatal damage, it enters the feigned death state instead of being properly defeated. This causes it to become untargetable, but it does remain on field, which interferes with blast targeting. When all Ichor Memosprites with Monoform Merger enter feigned death, they are finally properly defeated and removed from the field. Arbiter of the Lost Abyss then re-enters combat, and it takes 10 toughness damage per stack of Bloodline Frailty remaining. Due to the Stage 3 boss trait, in Phase 2, all of these summons share HP. In Stage 4, for every enemy unit on the field aside from the actual boss that is not in the feigned death state, all enemies deal 4% more damage and take 4% less damage. This takes effect even after the gimmick portions of the fight are over. On to the actual enemy attacks and patterns, starting with the Ichor Memosprite Winged Serpent. It gets an extra turn when not in its charging state, and will start with a standard blast attack, then enters a charging state with 5 stacks of Whirl. When not in charging state, it will alternate between the blast attack and a single target attack for its regular turn, then enter the charging state for its extra turn in either case. While Winged Serpent has stacks of Whirl, attacking it causes it to counter with an AoE follow-up attack, consuming 1 stack of Whirl in the process. When all Whirl stacks are removed, or if weakness broken, it exits the charging state. If its next regular turn is allowed to arrive while it holds stacks of Whirl, it will perform an AoE attack that deals more damage with more remaining Whirl stacks. Both this and its counterattack convert a portion of HP damage to corrosion. More on how corrosion works later. Now for the Ichor Memosprite Canine. They have 1 single target attack, which, in conjunction with one of its talents that causes it to gain the Hematort Stained state, allows it to apply Hematort Corruption. Again, more on this later. It also has a talent that, upon being defeated, allows adjacent friendly units to apply Hematort Corruption as well, but this specific talent is irrelevant to this boss fight, since it does not activate when entering the feigned death state. It only activates when all summons with Monoform Merger enter feigned death, at which point they are all defeated and there are no remaining units to take advantage of it. The last of the summons is the Ichor Memosprite Pheasant. If not already in Hematort Resonant state, it will cause itself and other Pheasants that are not weakness broken to enter the Hematort Resonant state. Otherwise, it will use a standard single target attack. Hematort Resonance causes other Pheasants in the same state to attack together with the given Pheasant and can only be removed via Weakness Break. Now for the actual boss, the Arbiter of the Lost Abyss. It always gets an extra turn and also has a few passive effects separate from the main fight gimmick. First, at the start of combat and when entering a new phase, it gains a 150% defense buff, which is removed when weakness broken. Second, it and its summons gain the Degraded Vessel effect. If a unit with Degraded Vessel is inflicted with a debuff, it takes 15 toughness damage and a small amount of true damage. If this extra toughness damage is what causes weakness break, it will be considered imaginary break and can cause imprisonment. Hi, Future Voltorian here with a correction. It's actually break equivalent to the enemy's damage type instead of just being flat out imaginary. Breaking a Winged Serpent through the Degraded Vessel effect is considered imaginary break because Winged Serpent deals imaginary damage. Breaking a Pheasant, on the other hand, is considered physical break and can cause bleed, because Pheasants deal physical damage. Finally, a number of scenarios can trigger something called Barrier Recoil. This is basically just toughness damage that cannot cause weakness break, but the boss has a talent that causes it to gain a stacking 10% defense reduction debuff every time it is triggered. All stacks are removed when the boss recovers from weakness break, but are otherwise permanent. For the boss's actual attacks, in phase 1 after it re-enters combat, it will operate on a 3-turn rotation. On the first action of its first regular turn in the rotation, the boss increases its speed by 50% while designating a random character as pursuit target, which marks the character as the primary target for the rest of the rotation. This gives the boss another extra turn, and with its 2 remaining extra turns, it will use a single target attack against the pursuit target, then summon 4 Pheasants. Pheasants summoned here have 60 toughness each. If the target has a shield upon being attacked, this single target attack triggers Barrier Recoil for 60 toughness damage. Defeating any of the Pheasants here also triggers Barrier Recoil for 40 toughness damage each. The second regular turn in the rotation is essentially the same as the first, but without the locking on part since a lock-on target already exists. It will use the same single target attack on the pursuit target, then summon up to 4 Pheasants, depending on remaining space in the field. The last regular turn in the rotation has the boss use a stronger single target attack on the pursuit target, then an AoE attack. This single target attack converts 50% of the HP damage taken to corrosion and triggers Barrier Recoil for 60 toughness damage if the target had a shield. The AoE attack converts 50% of the HP damage taken to corrosion and has no other effects. In phase 2, after all summons from the main gimmick are defeated and the Arbiter of the Lost Abyss re-enters combat, it immediately takes action, using the same AoE attack from the third turn in its lock-on rotation, followed by summoning 4 Pheasants. For its next turn, the boss will have the player designate a character as the primary target. Then, for its second action in the turn, use an AoE attack that deals a massive amount of damage to the primary target while inflicting the primary target with Hematort Corruption. At this point, the boss will alternate between this nuke and the 3-turn rotation seen in phase 1. Now for some explanations for effects I didn't explain prior, due to being relevant to multiple enemies. The first is for corrosion, or corroded HP. Certain enemy attacks convert a portion of HP reduced to corrosion. If a unit with corroded HP has HP consumed, all of the consumed HP converts to corrosion. If a unit with corroded HP takes HP damage from an attack that does not normally convert reduced HP to corrosion, it converts 50% of the damage anyway. When a unit with corroded HP attacks, 20% of it is restored per target, which is calculated all at once instead of sequentially per target hit for any single attack. This is affected by Healing Boost. This means that, as an example, hitting 5 enemies with one attack will restore all of the corroded HP, but attacking with a standard 3-target blast attack on one turn, then again on the next, will restore 60% the first time, then 60% of the remaining amount the second time, resulting in a 76% total restoration. When corroded HP is removed through restorative means, the unit gains the renewal buff, which increases their next attack's damage by 30%. The second effect is Hematort Corruption. When relevant enemy attacks deal HP damage, they apply Hematort Corruption. This is a 1-turn dot that deals damage equal to half the HP damage taken from the attack itself. If the unit also has any corroded HP, 50% of the HP damage taken from the Hematort Corruption dot also converts to corrosion. I'm not sure if this is for all dots or not, or even just damage in general, but Hematort Corruption is the only dot relevant to this mechanic in this boss encounter. Here's the general summary of the boss fight. The Arbiter of the Lost Abyss and its summons have a passive effect where they will take toughness damage and HP damage if inflicted with a debuff through an attack. At the beginning of each phase, the boss splits itself into 5 summons. Any given one of these summons don't actually leave the field when defeated, which interferes with blast targeting, and they only merge back into the actual boss when all of them are defeated. The sooner you defeat them, the more toughness damage the boss takes when it re-enters combat. After this, the boss will select a target and repeatedly attack that target for 3 turns, while also summoning Pheasants. Defeating the summons here or having a shield when the boss attacks will reduce its toughness and apply a stacking defense reduction to it. The end of these 3-turn strings also involves an AoE attack. The second phase adds a new attack, where the boss will have the player designate a character as the primary target, immediately after which it will deal AoE damage and specifically nuke the selected target. It will alternate between this and its usual 3-turn string. Now for some gameplay tips. In Phase 1, after the Arbiter of the Lost Abyss splits and removes itself from the field, try to distribute your damage across the summons. As mentioned before, when a summon with Monoform Merger is defeated, it enters the feigned death state instead of properly being removed from the field, which can interfere with blast targeting. If one of the offset middle enemies, that is, the Canines, is defeated early, not only are you losing out on general blast targeting damage, but you may also have to spend extra time on the side enemies, since targeting the actual center enemy won't extend the blast targeting past the feigned death Canines over to the side Pheasants. This isn't relevant in Phase 2, since all of these summons share HP, so just do the usual thing to maximize damage. For the second tip, after the Arbiter of the Lost Abyss re-enters combat, make sure to defeat the Pheasant summoned. First off, if careless or even just unlucky, a full 4 Pheasants attacking in one go can bring a unit to near death from full HP, even without the boss itself attacking. Secondly, defeating one Pheasant deals 40 toughness damage to the boss, which is equivalent to 2 typical single target or blast skills. The boss also gets a fat defense buff before it is weakness broken, so you'd be wasting a lot of damage if primarily targeting it, and defeating more summons also stacks the defense reduction on the boss, which means dealing more damage during the actual damage window. If you're using blast abilities and the side damage is still enough to one-shot the Pheasants, then you can probably disregard this point. Just have the boss as the primary target and let the blast damage deal with the summons, and obviously you just don't get that degree of control in the first place with AoE or bounce. Now for the character section. As a disclaimer, I lack a good portion of the characters on my account, so there's a lot that I am unable to personally test and or verify, but I'll go over some that I've used myself and others that I think may be noteworthy based on my observations and understandings of the mechanics. I will also refer to spiral stats, but keep in mind that, as mentioned before, character selections and scores are often heavily influenced by the current rotation's effects, independent of the actual boss and its mechanics. First off, the boss retains the part from the Memory of Chaos version where its toughness gets reduced if it attacks a shielded unit. This effect is even better this time around, additionally applying a stacking defense shred, so intuitively, shielders are great. While this certainly isn't wrong from a mechanic standpoint, the last shielder released was Pokemon Trainer in 3.6, and since then there have been releases that have made him less prevalent. As the shiny new thing, Elation teams are currently the strongest teams in general, but neither Superwolf nor Evanesha care about the attack stat, rendering one of his main selling points irrelevant. Both want HOYO, and while her attack buff is likewise insignificant, the energy she provides is extremely useful. As for Morton X Blade, well, I actually think this fight is designed for him. There's an additional fire weakness that isn't present for Judge of Oblivion, and the boss takes additional HP and toughness damage each time it is inflicted with a debuff, which he enables all allies to take advantage of. Pokemon Trainer also is not M-Blade's best sustain, instead preferring to pair with Hyacine. None of this is to say Pokemon Trainer or even Aventurine aren't good here. They are simply generally outshone by newer releases having better synergies with other sustains, and these synergies outweigh the effectiveness of forcing PT in to take advantage of his shield's triggering barrier recoil. Aside from that, I would say the main thing is to have a team that can defeat the summons quickly and is also on element. Sure, you should generally be prioritizing the summons first anyway, but breaking the boss is still going to take a while if that's your only source of toughness damage. Also, as is usually the case, older units are generally expected to have some level of vertical investment to maintain viability, especially if they don't take advantage of some specific mechanic. And that will be it for my in-depth guide on the Arbiter of the Lost Abyss boss encounter. If you've got any questions, feedback, or suggestions, consider leaving them down in the comments below. I wouldn't consider myself an expert, and I'm open to discussion, especially since, like I just said, there's a lot of stuff I can't test by virtue of not having many of the characters. Otherwise, if you enjoyed this video, found it helpful, and or enjoy my other content, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thanks for watching, good luck, and see you next time.
懲りないやつかなどボル。
かくれんぼ答え見つけてごらん。人は手この札で書店を見尽くさん。
逃げ場はない。